Hi there, and welcome to Protopie Bootcamp Lesson 5. In Lesson 5, we're going to be looking at scenes and how you can use scenes to create larger prototypes and stitch your screens together. So I've got this Untitled Pie already open, and I'm going to import a couple of scenes that I've created in Figma. So I'm going to go to my Figma importer, and I'm going to import my first scene. Just a few moments for the graphics to import. Okay, so I've got my first scene. Now I want to add another scene. So scenes are available from this flyout menu here. You automatically get a scene created when you create a new Pie file. If I want to add more scenes, I simply press this add button here. Okay, so now I've created a second scene, and you can see that Protopie has navigated to that second scene. You can see I've got a white canvas. Okay, so I'm now ready to import scene number 2. So I'm going to go back to my importer, choose Figma, and this time I'm going to choose my second scene and import that. Okay, so now I've got my second scene. So I can navigate between these two scenes just by double clicking between these two scenes. You see I've got this screen which is like this home screen, and it's going to navigate to this detail screen. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to select something to tap on so that I can attach the navigation. So I'm going to use this blue square here, and I'm going to come over to my triggers panel and I'm going to choose tap. So I've chosen my trigger. I now need to choose my response, and the response that we use for moving from scene to scene is a response called jump. So I'm going to choose jump, and it's going to ask me to select the scene I want to jump to. So I'm going to choose scene 2. And you can see here I've got a few pre-built transitions that I can use. These are some pretty standard transitions that you see in mobile apps. So I'm just going to choose a standard slide in here. And I'm going to leave the delay at 0. You can also see now I've got this second menu where I can choose what direction I want this transition to move in. So by default, it's going to move from right to left. So that basically means that this scene's going to exit stage left, and my new scene is going to enter stage right. Okay, so I'm going to leave right to left as my option. Okay, so let's test that and see if that works. Cool, so you can see I've now successfully navigated to my second scene. But I want to be able to navigate back. So let's jump over to scene number 2. And I want to show you another kind of jump. So again, we're going to use our back chevron here, and we're going to add a tap trigger. And I'm going to add to that a jump response. And I've got two options here. I can select scene 1, which will totally work, but I've also got this special option here called previously shown scene. So Protopie has this concept of remembering a history of how you travel from scene to scene. So if you've got multiple other scenes where you might come from and you're not sure which scene the user clicks on, you can choose previously shown scene, and that's going to remember the last scene that was clicked on, and it's going to navigate back. So we're going to use that in this case, previously shown scene. And it's important to note that when I use previously shown scene, because I'm on this second scene currently in my preview window, and I haven't actually come from scene number 1, you'll see that this doesn't work. It doesn't work because I haven't traveled anywhere yet. And that's only when we use previously shown scene. So to see if it's working or not, we need to navigate back to our first scene. Now we need to tap on our blue square. So we've now navigated to scene number 2. We should now be able to tap our back chevron, and you can see that we've jumped back to scene 1. But you can see that jumped instantly, so we didn't put any kind of transition on that. So let's just go back and add a transition. And on this one, we're going to choose the slide out transition, and we're going to reverse the direction. So we're going to go from left to right. So we want this scene to come, the previously shown scene to come in from the left. Okay, so let's go back to scene number 1. And we're going to tap our blue square again, and we're going to tap our chevron. Cool. So you can see now we've created a really quick and easy, quick and dirty connection between two scenes, as you would in some more simpler prototyping tools or tools that have prototyping features such as Figma, Sketch, or Adobe XD. Okay, so there's a few more things that we can do with scenes which I'd like to show you. So we're going to go to our second scene, and I actually want this green tick. I don't want it to show straight away. I want it to animate in after the scene transition has happened. So to do that, I'm going to use another trigger, and this is called a start trigger. And a start trigger is a trigger that will automatically run when a scene loads. So you can think of it as a kind of automatic trigger. So what I want to do in this trigger is I want to add my animation. So as soon as the transition has happened, my animation will run. So what we're going to do, we're going to select our checkbox, and we're just going to turn the opacity down to 0. So it's effectively hidden. And we're going to come over to our start trigger. And the first thing I'm going to do is, actually, I'm just going to pre-select my checkbox before I choose my response. And I'm going to choose opacity, and I'm going to bring the opacity up to 100. And I'm going to set that to a duration of 0.1. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a scale response. And I'm going to scale by a factor. So that's just basically a percentage rather than a hard value. And what I want to do is I actually want to make this kind of scale from a small to large. So I need to previously set its size to small. So I'm going to set it to 50%. And I need Protopie to size this down to the small point instantly, because I don't want that to be seen. I only want you to be able to see the scaling up animation. So I'm going to set its duration to 0. So basically what's going to happen, as you can see here, it's going to instantly scale this down before I do my scaling up animation. But you can also see it's slightly offset. So that's because we've got our origin in the wrong place. We need to put our origin in the center. So let's just change that. Cool, so you can see now that's in the correct origin. And I now need to do the scaling up animation. So I'm going to add another scale and make sure that my checkbox group is selected. And I'm going to go back to my scale to a factor, and I'm going to make it 100%. Okay, so let's just run through this. So when the start trigger triggers, which is when the scene loads, it's going to take opacity of our checkbox to 100%. And it's going to take a duration of 0.1 of a second to do that. We could actually reorder these just so it's a bit more easier to read. It doesn't really matter what order these are in because they all execute at the same time. But we're just, for brevity, we're just going to put our scale first. So we can see now that the first thing in our minds we're going to do is we're going to scale our little checkbox down to its starting position, 50%. We're then going to bring up the opacity. And we're going to use a duration of 0.1 of a second. And then finally, we're going to do our scaling up animation. And if we come over to the preview window, and if you just hit this reload button down in the bottom left-hand screen, you can see we've got a little animation going. But we can make this animation a little bit more interesting. So let's go to our second scale. And instead of ease in and ease out, I'm going to use the spring animation easing curve. And I'm just going to turn the friction down to 10. And this is just going to give it a bit of a crazy bounce. There you go. And one final thing I'm going to do is you can probably just about see it. There's still the grey deselected state underneath. So that's this ellipse 8. I'm just going to select that. I'm going to add an opacity to this as well. And I'm going to turn this opacity down to 0. And again, I'm going to leave that at 0.2 of a second. So let's just... Actually, I'm going to turn that down to 0.1 of a second. Just so we can get rid of that so it doesn't kind of show when we're doing our bounce animation. Okay, so we've set up our animation that's going to trigger on the start trigger. And there's two options here that I just want to show to you. There's this first option, which is this drop down, which has got an option to start after the jump or an option to start with the jump. So when you're using the jump response, the jump trigger, you've got the ability to choose either of these, and one's just starts slightly faster than the other. So it really depends on what transition you're using. But if you're using an instant transition, it won't make any difference which one you choose. But if you're using a slide transition like we are, then what this means is that it's going to make sure that slide transition happens and completes before it runs anything in this start trigger. If you want it to start immediately, so effectively work like an instant trigger, then you can choose start with jump. And in that case, the transition is going to happen, but the animation is also going to run at the same time. Now, we don't want this second option because we actually want to cleanly see our second animation after the scene has loaded. One more thing I want to draw your attention to is this option restart every time. So we're going to check that because we actually want this start trigger to run every time we come to this scene. If we didn't check this, it would only run once per session and it wouldn't run again, which is sometimes what you want. Okay, so we've got our start trigger set up. Let's just navigate back to our scene 1, and we're going to come over to our preview, and we're going to tap our blue square. Our scene's going to load, and you can see we've got our animation loading as well. And we can easily navigate back to scene 1, and we can run it again, and you can see that it's animated again. Let's just go back to scene 2 and just turn that off so you can see the difference. So we're going to come back to our start trigger, and we're going to turn off our restart every time. Okay, so let's go back to scene 1. We're going to tap our blue square. We're going to get our animation. We tap back, and then we tap blue square again. You can see that our animation has already run, so it hasn't run a second time. Okay, so this about wraps up our look at scenes and shows, hopefully you can see how quickly you can put some quick and dirty prototypes together inside a Protopie. Protopie isn't just for high fidelity, high end motion design. It's really great for really putting stuff together really quickly as well. Okay, so that's the end of this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.